introduction? Oh, I'm not. Okay. My name's Mike Frazier, and I'm here this evening to talk about the Teal maps. And I'm going to do this in several different ways, or the order of things tonight is going to be first to take a look at the portion of the website, rhinebeckhistory.org, and that's what we'll start off with, to see how that's structured and where the maps are listed for those of you who may not be familiar with that website. The second thing I'm going to do is very briefly thank a few people who are very instrumental in getting the Historical Society up to this point. Third thing is to talk briefly about the history of Frank Teal himself. And fourth, and the main thing I'm going to do, is look at a bunch of maps. And hope all of that is really scintillating and exciting. So, David, if you would be so kind as to press the button. And we're actually on the web here, going to rhinebeckhistory.org. And those of you who have not looked at the website should, because there's an enormous amount of information there that's been collected over quite a few years under the leadership of the Equipment Resource Center through Marilyn Hatch and Nancy Kelly. And we've gradually added more organizations as they have added records. Tonight we're looking at one of those sets of information, a collection that belongs to the Rhinebeck Historical Society, and that's the Teal Maps collection. So David, if you would click on the information page there, and this is just a broad overview. Actually, some of this information I'm going to wind up going over again tonight, so we don't want to go through the general description of the collection and its author, because you'll hear more about that in a moment. But if you'd go down a little bit more, David. So the important part here is a description of the fields that are in the database that we're going to look at in just a moment. And there are, I don't know, a dozen different fields. And if there's some uncertainty as to what it is we're trying to include there, just go back to this information page and you can get the description. Now, David, if you would just go back and take us to the actual records, which is over there on the right, that red thing. And if we want to search in that collection for a particular kind of record, we can search records according to any of these criteria, and these are the fields or criteria that were described earlier, and it'll make more sense once we, okay, let's look at Southland and see how many records. Just hit enter over on the right, and looks like we have 25 maps that had some reference to the name Southland. And for each of those maps, there is this kind of information. So, that's all that I'm going to say about the website. If you're interested, check it out, rhinebeckhistory.org. There are also the records of the Museum of Rhinebeck History, Egbert Benson Historical Society, other records from our own historical society. There's also a postcard collection, but not tonight. Tonight, the Teal maps. So if you would go, just close this, and let me begin, if you could go to the next slide, David. There are a number of people that were instrumental in allowing us to get to the point that we're at with the Teal maps. And probably more important than any others are two from Red Hook, Claire Carr and Wint Aldrich. They were the ones who found out that this collection not only existed, but where it was. Had it not been for them, it would have disappeared entirely. Frank Teal died in 1949, and the surveying business that he owned, including the maps, passed to his partner, Robert Decker, who'd been working with him for a few years prior to Frank's death. Frank himself, Robert Decker himself didn't live that much longer, died in, I think it was the mid-1960s, and his widow, Rose Decker, who lived actually right across the street from where the deli is in the village on the southwest corner of Parsonage and East Market Street, decided that she had no interest in the business. And there was this fellow up in Catskill who had done one survey of the village of Rhinebeck, who was kind of interested in the area, and bought the collection from Mrs. Decker, and but put it in a chicken coop, and there it lay. It was 1976, 10 years later, and chickens are not very nice to doctors. You will see some of the evidence of that. Neither is sunlight. But because of Claire and Wimp, they got rescued, and half of them that had something to do with Red Hook are at Egbert Benson, and the other half roughly are here in those brown map cabinets that you passed coming in here, or inside the archives room here. Wimp, glad you made it.
I apologize.
No need to apologize. I'm just telling everybody that it's because of the work that you did with Claire Carr that we have these things to talk about. Had it not been for that, we wouldn't be where we are. Another person who was instrumental was Elma Williamson, who was the person who initially organized the Rhinebeck Historical Society aspect of the collection and made some very rough descriptions of what we had. And a couple of people who helped out a lot as we poured through the maps trying to identify things were Karen Watajik, who's a volunteer here, retired attorney, and Kay Varilli. They've both spent many, many hours doing a portion that you saw that database, and one of the fields is identifiers, and any proper names on those maps we tried to pull out, whether they're any nouns, bingo, and those are very useful when you're doing a search. The other thing that helped out other organization was the Thompson Trust, and Nancy Kelly hooked us up with them. We were able to get a grant which paid for a lot of the scanning, and actually I see Al Slingerland is here in the room, New Archives. Al was our scanner par excellence, who we would haul these things up to his place and tell him, don't you dare damage anything. You could hardly open them up without having them crack. And he figured out ways to do that and lay them between sheets of plastic and get them through his machine. And, so we now have images of them, so we don't have to touch the originals to go back and re-examine them. And Barbara Bielenberg and Bobby Thompson up at the Egbert Benson Historical Society were folks who spent a lot of time with me, allowing me to go through the records, the field notes, the files for not just the Red Hook but the Rhinebeck maps. All of those are up at Egbert Benson, and they're very nicely preserved and very readily accessible, thank God. And finally, the FDR Library, the Winnicke Land Trust, Clinton Corners Historical Society, all of those folks over the past few years have donated map cabinets to us that are now in the archives room. They're all very heavy map cabinets, as John Vincent's busted trailer knows very well. We blew a tire or two, hauling that 1 ton map cabinet out of the FDR library. So, those are a few of the people who helped. So, let's go on. So we're going to begin in kind of an unlikely place, and that is Ethiopia. And this is 1953. And it is where I learned to hate maps. That's the wife of Brigadier Sanford. She was our teacher, Mrs. Sanford. And the class, this was an English school. I was about 8 or 9 years old. With all of my classmates there. And we were in social studies. I learned to my horror that what we were expected to do was to be able to draw from memory the outline of any of the countries in the British Commonwealth. Well, in 1953, there was just in Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Tanganyika, Rhodesia, Nigeria, you know, it went on and on. Not to mention the various, you know, the sun never sets in the British Empire, well, but what I learned, I mean, what any kid does is try to keep up with his classmates. And these were all, my dad was in East Africa because he was a sergeant in the U.S. Army assigned to to help the Ethiopian Army. And most of these other kids were children of diplomats who were posted to Ethiopia. Or some of them, I wasn't boarding at the school, but many of the children were, had come from other countries across mostly Africa, a few from India. And it was really a magnificent school. I found the work exceptionally hard, exceptionally demanding, but I learned geography, and I learned, these other kids knew geography, and this was counterpart to the third grade, exceptionally well. And the upshot was that, you know, you not only learned about these countries, but you learned why in these countries hills were where they were, or why there were ports where they were, and why these rivers generated communities, and why in other places nobody lived. All of that was something that after a while I understood. And ever since I've had a great fascination with maps, but it didn't start out that way. So let's...
Which one are you?
Yeah,
Where are you?
We have to see you.
Oh,
Bottom right.
anybody want to take a guess?
Bottom right.
Bottom right? No.
No.
Second choice? No.
No?
Up
No.
on the left.
I'm a scrawny little kid over here.
Shorts that are too big.
Holy mackerel.
Yeah, that was me. So, let's go to Frank Teal. Frank's middle name isn't a coincidence. If you were born in 1867, you had fond memories of the preceding president. And Frank would live to the very healthy age of 82. And this photograph, by the way, is in the collection at Egbert Benson. They did give me permission at that time to use it. I don't know if that continues or not, but
It's okay.
it's okay. All right, if we have that on the record. This was a photo taken by Tracy Dows in 1927. Tracy Dows was one of Frank Teal's most frequent clients, and Frank came from a long line of residents of this region of the Hudson Valley. The Teal name is Palatine. They had come settled in this area actually over in Ulster County in the early 1700s. His grandfather, Jacob Teal, was a blacksmith and a wagon maker. And very briefly, for a couple of years, taught school. His son, Frank Teal's father, was John D. Teal. He was a farmer all his life. His farm consisted of a little over 100 acres. It's part of what today probably ought to be called the Red Hook Aerodrome, but for some reason they call it the Rhinebeck Aerodrome, but it's physically in Red Hook. And it's on that, in that farmhouse that Frank Teal was born. And he left Rhinebeck to be educated at Hartwick Seminary up in Oneonta, and graduated from there at the age of 23 in 1980. I don't have the photo here, but he's looking very serious in that photo, and was a very serious guy. And then he worked for 2 years as a civil engineer in New York City on something that was called the Broadway Cable Road. It basically was the cable car that ran from the Battery at the lower end of south end of Manhattan all the way up to Central Park. And it ran along Broadway and also along 7th Avenue. And the engineering involved, there was a significant improvement in the period that Frank Teal worked down there with many other engineers. The person organizing that effort was insistent that the best engineers be involved in the design and construction of this enormous powerhouse, several-story powerhouse that was to be built between 50th and 51st Street and between 6th and 7th Avenue. There were several other powerhouses, one lower down around 36th, 39th Street, but this new one was just an engineering marvel. He just spent a few years there. The construction was pretty much done, and New York City now had cable cars that were drawn not by horses, but by power of these cables that was generated through steam power at these plants. There was a lot of environmental concern by the folks living on 6th Avenue. I remember reading one article about a neighbor who was, a group of neighbors that were quite upset at what they thought would be a lot of smoke coming out of this very tall stack. And the response from the owners of the railroad was, well, number one, that stack is going to be even taller, and number two is we are using a hard coal rather than a soft coal, so you really don't need to worry. So I don't know what the follow-up was, but it did get built, and it's there. So Frank comes back when that work is done, and he teaches for 2 years in the Germantown schools, then spends, kind of like his grandfather, but then he spends another 2 years as the principal of the North Germantown Union School. After that stint, he decides to become a student again and goes to a place called St. Stephen's Theological School, better known as today as Bard College. He's in the class in 1901, but he doesn't stay past 1899. The reason apparently is that his father passed away, and now he was responsible for his sisters and his mother. He had 2 sisters. So this is when he actually starts work as a surveyor, and he surveys for the next 50 years. So let's take a look, David, if you would, at some of what he did. This is Garden Street, and anybody who was appointed as a municipal engineer, which Frank was in Rhinebeck, I think he also had that position in Red Hook, but I'm not sure about that. And one of your jobs, you spend a lot of time on drainage issues in the streets. This is a profile of Garden Street. The Beekman Arms is right here. Here's Route 9 North is this way. And a bit difficult to read here, but he's indicating that the grade here is, what was the number? It's 0.4%. So it's going downhill from this point over to the fence line over here, which I believe is where the Delamater property is today. That not much changes here in Rhinebeck. So let's take a closer look, the next slide, at a corner. You may remember a restaurant called Panda House, which is no longer there, but the name here is Montgomery House. I think somebody actually lived in it who was related to the Montgomery family at the time. And I remember that when you'd go by Panda, you had to be careful, because even though there's a sidewalk there today, and there was no sidewalk in this picture, somebody would open the door and it'd slam right in your face. Well, if they opened it, I don't know that there was a door that opened in the street in this place, but it would have opened right into the street. So one presumes that the house was there prior to the street and they just were not going to move. So let's go. What's that?
And then it was Pottenberg's and children, and that was the big famous bar.
Yes, it was a notorious bar for many years.
When they put their money on Saturday night and paid the tab
My
and started
kids
a new
knew
one.
that place.
Yes, yes. Yes, they kept the village police department very busy.
Yes.
Lots of complaints from the clients of the Beekman Arms, from what I understand, who wanted to sleep. So let's take a look at the another project that he would have had as a municipal engineer, namely designing the abutments for the Parsonage Street Bridge. And there was some work done on that recently, but not on the abutments. It was on the pipe that ran underneath. The abutments are still fine, although they did do some widening at one point to put in sidewalks. The cost of this bridge in 1926, all costs, engineering, concrete, steel, removing the dirt, putting it back, was $525. Now granted, the value of the dollar is different than what it was then, but I think the village was getting a bargain. So let's take a look now at another site. This was 1926, and this was a gift from this piece of property. This is a portion of Ferncliff at the northern end that was to be a gift from Vincent Astor to his sister Alice and her betrothed on the occasion of their wedding. Her betrothed was Serge Obolensky, Prince Serge Obolensky, from Russia. Of course, we'd had the Russian Revolution 9 years before this, so he wasn't going to be sitting on any throne soon. But what is intriguing, well, what is challenging to a surveyor is all these squiggly lines. This is what in surveying parlance is known as a topographical survey. It shows you, these are 2-foot intervals, and you will see that over on the right-hand side here are some scratches. That is actually the design of a mansion that would be, in addition to the land, the actual gift. But in order to put that mansion there, it was important you have a flat piece of ground. So there had to be a little bit of digging, and it was important to estimate accurately how much had to be removed and where you, at what level you actually wanted it flattened to. These little additional scratchings up on the upper right there are his calculations of the amount of cubic yards that had to be moved. If you want to go to the next slide, this is, well, Ferncliff Prince Obolinski's house, but these later notes are from somebody else who was doing the record keeping. They misspelled Obolinski, they misspelled Van Hoffmannsthal. I think they got the rest of it right, but she divorced several times, so I don't know how happy Vincent was about that, but it certainly drove people like Frank Teal and his record keeping crazy if he had to keep, he would keep files according to the name of the most current owner of the property. And properties didn't change hands quite that often then as they do now. Why don't we go to the next one, David? This is a close-up of the house, of the proposed mansion. What you see here, it's, well, you probably don't see it. I have a hard time seeing it, and I'm right up against it. There's a C over an L, and it says drive. It's the center line of the drive of the mansion. He also indicates the various elevations that are necessary for different portions of the house. And it was, I mean, this kind of bumpy area, which was comparable to what we see at Ferncliff Forest today. That got flattened out perfectly. And if you'll go to the next slide, David, that's a bit closer view of the proposed structure. This is what was called a it's a block structure with, block structure isn't the term, but it's essentially a block structure with abutments, with these appendages on either side. It's classically balanced, but to my mind it looks a little weird with these pieces on the end, but that was to give additional room. David, if you can go to the next one. This is a, you see how level it is here. Very attractive. It served as, in recent years, Teen Challenge owned the property. It's more recently been Valeur. Marion Rue, I think, was an earlier name for the property. But the real estate agent who took this picture when the property was up for sale a few years ago very carefully hid, using the trees on either side, the appendages on either side of the house. Why don't we go to the next one? As I mentioned earlier, Tracy Dows was one of Frank Teal's busiest client. He did more work for Frank Teal than for Tracy Dows than just about anybody else. Tracy Dows was from Irvington down in Westchester, and it was there that he met the daughter of a New York City attorney, Alice Olin. The Olins owned property up here in Rhinebeck. Tracy marries Alice in 1903. 1905, he starts buying up property here in Rhinebeck. The year before, his son Olin had been born. And the this is a 1912 map. It shows the 700 plus acres that belong to that Tracy Dows had bought up in the period between 1905 and 1912, kind of on the left half of that map, and the portion to the right is that had been the Olin property, and in effect the two merged. What we're looking at here is the border down below here is Route 9. The right border is Fox Hollow Road, and we're looking at the railroad here in the Hudson River. It was an enormous piece of property. The next slide, please. This is just a small portion of that. Somebody has outlined apparently a proposed property division at a later date in blue here, but what is in the center of that is what today is marked actually as Southland's Drive, which was the main entrance off Route 9 to Fox Hollow. In Fox Hollow, this would follow for a good portion, half a mile plus to get to the actual mansion. Next one. And going further north on the property, I've twisted it sideways here, but Route 9 is down here. This is Fox Hollow Road on the right. That's the northern border of the combined properties. And these would be, if Tracy was coming back from Rhinebeck, my guess is he probably didn't go further south to Southland's Drive. He probably turned off on Fox Hollow Road, and this takes you directly to the mansion and connects to that other road. But I singled this out because on many of the mansions in Rhinebeck at this time, on these estates, the farms were as important an aspect of the estates as having a great view, having a lot of isolated property. And this is a portion of that property that was used to grow vegetables, flowers. If we look at there's a view here, and actually Peggy Lavelle, who is here, and I have been trying to figure out exactly where this view was. This is we think a 1918 photo, 1970, this is a Harry Coutant photograph taken 6 years after the preceding map was done. And there may have been some additions to some of these buildings, but what's important here, and the reason I called your attention to it, is just to point out that the landscape here was things being grown. That was an important part of many of these estates. Okay. Let's travel north here to the Tivoli, and Rose Hill was a piece of property that belonged to John Watts de Peister, who had bought it from a cousin, I believe it was, of his wife. The cousin's name was Eugene Livingston. And in 1843, he built a Tuscan villa on the property. Tuscan villas apparently were all the rage for those who had the wealth to put them up at that time. And there were flower gardens, stables, farm buildings, but none of us lives forever, and neither did Mr. de Peister, and he passed away in 1906. And so the site became the Leake and Watts orphan home, and was that for a number of years. In 1964, somebody by the name of Dorothy Day, who led the Catholic worker movement, acquired the property, and was there until 1978. And the property was vast. I think if we go to the next slide, you know, David, I think I'm going to turn. I should have done this earlier. Turn the lights on. This is the northern property boundary, and this number over here is 2,074. That's number of feet. That's not quite half a mile. And this was a very impressive piece of property, and one that it wouldn't have been the first time it was surveyed, I'm sure, but nonetheless, Frank had a habit of wanting to verify his predecessor's measurements, and we find on many maps, not on this one, there are many older maps by Hazard Champlin, who was doing surveys here in Rhinebeck in the mid to late 1800s, where Frank is saying that, you know, he got the deviation between magnetic north and true north off by the wrong number of degrees. He took the wrong year for his calculations, and so the northern boundary, you know, really is not here, but it's 25 feet further off. And when you make an incorrect measurement and it's southeast so many degrees, 2,000 feet, and you're off by 1/10 of a degree, that can result in the corner boundary at the right there being off by many feet, and hence an occasional dispute over property boundaries that Frank would find himself in the middle of resolving. But the next slide here shows the kinds of fences that there were on this property. I think if you owned a property this large, you probably would want to be sure it was all yours. Board fences, wire fences, no fence, picket fence, and a stone wall. It was important to note all of those. Let's go to the next property. This is the home of Levi Morton. Ellerslie before that had belonged to William Kelly. There was a Maturin Livingston prior to Kelly. It's one of the prime pieces of property on the Hudson. In this survey done in 1912, north is that way. We see the Hudson River and the railroad here, the lake on the property on the bottom, and Morton Road is pretty much is today where it had been at that time. One of the largest barns in Dutchess County at the time that suffered a fire in the 1950s, I believe, but housed a magnificent herd of cattle that Morton was very proud of. Let's go to the next one. Looking more closely at a detail from that map, looking here at the water tower, which today is one of the few structures remaining. The current owner has seen fit to remove most of the structures that were on the property. He has some concerns over the safety of that water tower. There's a very large tank way at the top, and as long as that tank isn't about ready to topple over, he's agreed to leave the tower in place, but is concerned about that. Now, the reason this map was made was to show the water lines, the sewer lines, and the electric lines on the property. The interesting thing regarding that water tower, again, this is something that may be too small to read from a distance, but what it says here is that river water tank in lower portion of tower. There are two tanks in that tower. The Hudson River water, and then there was water that got pumped up from the lake. And you'll see these different pipes coming from different directions. And the reason that it was important to use those different kinds of waters was there were many different kinds, again, of crops as well as flowers being grown on the estate, and those doing that on the property, actually many of the people that Morton had hired were individuals who were carryovers from William Kelly's days, and they knew what kind of water, they probably didn't know what kind of minerals were in the water, but there were certain waters that worked better with growing certain flowers, and that was knowledge that was responsible for pumping from those sources. A lot of water needed to be used also for the cattle on the property. Next slide, David. This is looking down from the mansion towards the lake, and you see in between a wheel that was the flower garden. And as you stood there in the mansion on higher ground, on the highest piece of ground on the property, you would have looked down towards the river on the far side, but what you would have seen looking in this direction is seen in the next slide. This is what, we're standing at the mansion here looking down at the lake. And this is what Morton referred to as his Italian garden. Next slide, David. Another magnificent piece of property, Linwood, is one that Frank Teal did work on. And the Schock family, actually J. Rupert Schock's uncle, Colonel George Rupert, had made his money, was making his money at the time of this map, in the beer business in New York City. There was a sizable German community on the Lower East Side that certainly was responsible for keeping things going in the beer business, and a lot of controversy over on the part of those communities during Prohibition. But this was, but as I say, he made his money that way, and was also one of the original owner of the owner in the 1930s, 1920s of the New York Yankees. So this is his nephew, who's having work done outlining the contours and a lot of the buildings on the property here. Next slide, David. Oh, this is just most of the documents that most of the maps that we have in our collection are not the final products. This is one that is, and actually has Frank Teal's seal. This is the only one we have with that. We have quite a few with his signature, but none with his seal. Next one. This is a closer view of the southern portion of the property. You see the mansion up here, the gardens, vegetable garden down below here, and a lot of the livestock activity down in this area. We've got poultry houses here, a duck house, a couple barns, and if we go, before you go to the next slide, we're going to see a view that actually comes from this direction. And what's interesting to me is that as interesting as all of this is, and as proud as the owner would have been, just as at Foxwood, you kept the two distinct. Go ahead. So when you look here, you'll see the tower over here, the tall stack, but you don't see the mansion, and the mansion would not have seen this. This is, well, at the time it was called Fishing Ground Road, more recently South Mill Road. Landsman's Kill is below these trees in the road, going right out into Vanderburg Cove and into the Hudson. But these are the poultry houses. There were two in the sketch, there are three here. The duck house is right here, and some of the other structures. Actually, in this picture, these tiny little things are for veal calves that would be slaughtered at a relatively young age, didn't get very big. Now, what we've been looking at is Rhinebeck as it is, or at least as it was. This is Rhinebeck as it might have been. 1939, the main building of the Rhinebeck where the Monsignor Brogan Center is today, across from Catholic Church, where the Bulkley School had been, there had been a building attached to that much closer to East Market Street. That burned down in 1939 and wreaked havoc on the education for the high school students, at least in the opinion of some. What had to happen was church basements had to open up, some halls had to be made available, even private homes upstairs would serve as the site for classrooms. Rhinebeck became the poster child for how not to run a school district. There were front page stories in the New York Times around this period, and a lot of controversy over whether or not the school should be building a new structure, and if so, where. And in the middle of those discussions, one of the options, it was this one right here. And what we see here are mostly athletic fields. If we look a little bit closer on the next slide, the proposal here was to actually expand the Bulkley School building, or Monsignor Brogan Center building, is right here, and the original dark outline is the way it is today. But there was a proposal to expand that and then to put an underpass beneath South Street and run it right down to the Kill, put a bridge across the Kill, have tennis courts, a track, football field, baseball diamond. There was going to be a dirt path that wound along the, actually, you know what that says? I thought that says dike, doesn't it? D-I-K-E. Okay, so they had to build that up, and what they were doing was, some of this is the original direction, but they were rechanneling. You'll see here it says new channel for the stream. There had to be quite a bit of fill in order to make that work. This did not get implemented. World War II intervened, and you couldn't get any labor during World War II, even if you'd been able to get people to agree on what you were going to do. There was a lot of discussion throughout the state about centralization after the end of the war. A lot of controversy in every community in New York State over the changing from 17,000 school districts to what eventually became 752. And Rhinebeck was right in the middle of those controversies. There's a book written by Marcella Clark, bless her soul, who passed away recently, but it's called Diary of the Central School, and most of it is about that controversy. Eventually, this site was not used. 1952, Rhinebeck Central School was built where it is, to where the high school and today the middle school as well are located, and substantial athletic fields in the very beginning at that site. Next slide, David. Another proposal that never made it was called Beekman Park. And this is Route 9. This was property that belonged at the time, I believe, to Senator Ryan, Alan Ryan, who owned Grassmere, and this the proposal was to cut this up into quite a few building lots. In fact, on the next slide, you will see that the number of lots we're talking about went up to 34. And a few years ago, when this property was in the process of a real estate transaction, the neighboring owner who was considering buying this at the time came in here and saw that I had this out had this map out, and it looks like a very contemporary map. And he looked at me shocked, saying, "Who's proposing that?" It never happened. Next slide. And this is Parsons Street, and it is the proposal to cut Parsonage Street further north, and to do it in a manner that, let's go to the next slide, that puts sidewalks on either side along Platte. North is this way. This is why it's actually upside down. But and he would have, starting at this point, put an island in the middle with trees, and trees on either side. It would have narrowed the street in effect, and probably slowed the traffic some, boulevard effect. I was hoping my wife could make it tonight.
I'm paying attention very much.
For those who are not aware of it, Cecily is the head of the tree commission in the village, and I thought she would be amused.
Yeah.
But it never came to pass.
No, I know. My
Don't you
thought
dare
was
try it.
dream on.
So, okay, go ahead. So, Teal, as I said earlier, did 50 years of nose to the grindstone surveying here in the community. And he is buried today, this is his tombstone, at St. Peter's Lutheran Church. Today the congregation there is Harvest, but it's still, the graveyard is obviously the original graveyard. This was the Teal plot. Families going back several generations are there. David, if you would go to the next slide. That's Frank Teal on the upper part. I was a little chagrined. I was trying to track down the gravestone and finally found it. You know, that it was in this kind of condition. Those who have written about Frank Teal do tend to talk about the situation in which he passed away, and I would be delinquent if I didn't at least make a stab at it. It was December 22nd, 1949, and he had been to the bank. He didn't have an account at the bank, but he used to pile up his large checks, and he would go periodically to the bank, maybe once a month, cash them, and pay his bills at the same time. So that's what he did. He came home. His sister, Eve, was buried there. You'll notice both 1949. She had passed away in May. Was a little younger than he was. She used to make his dinners, and I guess pretty much take care of him. And when his sister passed away, a neighbor, elderly neighbor, had promised the sister that she would take care of the kinds of things that the sister had taken care of. She would prepare his meals, deliver them to him, and then pick up the dishes the next morning, which she did deliver his meal to him on December 22nd. She came back the next morning to collect the dishes. The door was locked. She figured, well, you know, he forgot to leave it unlocked for me, so I'll have to come back later and hope that he's home then. And she comes back with her son in the evening. It was already dark, and the son knew that there was a way he could crawl in through a kitchen window, only to find smoke in the room. Frank Teal is on the floor. There's been a fire. His body is largely burned. And later examination reveals that there were 2 bullet holes through his head, .22 caliber. And that's basically all we know. There were a couple of teenagers who lived nearby who were arrested because they owned guns that were similar, it was thought, to the .22 caliber. I guess they were .22 caliber guns. A lot of people had those at that time. And but they were released. Apparently they had good alibis. And in January, a month later, a 15-year-old boy, adopted child who had been a runaway, confesses to the murder. And there's a lot of excitement in the papers, but after the interviews with psychologists, psychiatrists, the determination is that this kid is just making this up, trying to look for attention. So it's in the state police files, and I've heard people with various theories. I don't have any of my own. But I think what we have to remember is not this gruesome ending, but the fact that this was somebody who was a scholar, who had worked with some of the best engineers, probably in the world, when he worked in New York City, who was very proud of his craft, who was a superb mathematician, who to this day is a model to other surveyors. We had somebody come in here who was trying to resolve what in effect was a property boundary dispute just 3 months ago, and one of the Teal maps was critical in decision that he had to give to the folks he was working for. Frank Teal had an outstanding reputation, and it's unfortunate that more people don't know about him. He was a model for his profession, worked exceptionally hard, and was not at all the kind of person who would brag about it, make a big deal about it. One of the most amusing stories about him is that he would go everywhere on a bike. He didn't want to own a car. he had to make, you know, the distance between Stone Church Road, where he lived, and the south end of Rhinebeck, where Southlands is, where he did most of his work, is a good trek. And a lot of this he would do, it didn't matter what the weather was. And he would often dress as he did in that photograph we looked at earlier. One of the best recollections of him is by Debbie Dows. But my point is that he could have afforded a car easily. Tracy Dows, in fact, said to him, look, you know, you would save me and you a lot of time if you would drive. I will buy you a car and give it to you. So Frank said, okay, if you do that, I'll drive that car, but then you have to agree to ride a bike. He knew it was no deal. So, but Frank was exceptionally well respected. There is, in hundreds of items of correspondence, there's only one person who I found was at all critical of Frank. That was Laura Delano, which tells me as much about Laura Delano as it does about Frank. But it's a lot of fun working with his maps, and I've learned a lot about the community. So I'd be glad to answer any questions anybody has. Lights? Okay.
Mike, I'd just like to add a coda to this wonderful talk that does bring back the story of a remarkable member of the community. And I'm very glad that you did this. It's an admirable piece of work. I was 7 years old in 1949, and it was Christmas time, and I can remember, it may not have been the first time I ever saw my father weep, but he came in, and there are tears on his cheeks, and yet somebody has shot and killed Frank Teal. How could anyone do such a thing to that gentle, admirable man who helped so many people and did so much good, professional work. And that memory has stayed with me for years and years and years, and as I guess you said at the beginning, it was one of the things when John Losey said, well, as we got warmed up for the National Bicentennial in Red Hook, and we were thinking about starting an historical society, if Frank Teal was here, or if we could lay our hands on his records, we'd be getting a great head start in all of this. And so we set about trying to find it, and it turned out that Bob Decker here in Rhinebeck had acquired his papers, and Mrs. Decker told me, this would have been in '75, I guess, that after he had died, she had shopped them around, and Vincent Sheridan up in Leeds, New York, and Catskill had bought them. And as I guess you said, that he didn't really have use for the Rhinebeck records, he didn't expand his business down here, and was happy to give them away. And boy, the Loseys and I got into their big station wagon. We were up there in just as fast as we could make it, and they were in the chicken house, and we got them all out, and indeed it was a great head start for all of this work.
Great debt to you for having done that, because these would have just withered away in the chicken coop. One of the things that you probably saw in a lot of these records was both ends darkened from, you know, these were all rolled up, and they were exposed to the sun as well as to chicken activity.
He was, I mean, I think in addition to doing the surveying for the client, he himself was so interested in the history of the individual properties that he would run the title searches, even if that wasn't the assignment. And that's what survives in the flat files, in the vertical files. It's so important to all of this. So it's tremendously exciting.
Yeah, it's you know, I didn't mention Benson Frost in our discussions, but so much of the correspondence was with Benson, was from Benson to Frank or vice versa. And there he is in a portrait right in the corner of the room. That was the attorney who served as the individual to whom somebody buying real estate or selling real estate would go to him to handle that transaction. Yes, Bob?
In the school picture, you said you hated maps. Where along your timeline did you acquire a love of maps?
You know, it was towards, I only went to that school for a year. And it was towards, I think by the end of the year, I started to get comfortable with it, but I retired from being a school superintendent in 2005, and I had, before that, taught an occasional, I was, when I was a teacher, I taught English, I taught French, but I occasionally taught the social studies class, and I enjoyed those the most, but when I was an administrator, I couldn't do that. So when I retired, I knew that the one thing I wanted to do was history, and if there was some way I could wangle my nose into working on a map project, that's what I wanted to do. So, yeah, so frankly, it took a long time to get back to it. Don, I think you had it.
Like, the Parsons Street Bridge, was that the first bridge over Lansman's Hill?
No, there was the bridge, the Astor Bridge on Route 9 had been there
No,
much
but
longer.
On Parsons Street.
Oh, you know, I'm not sure about that, Don. I think I'm not sure.
Because I live on South Parsons Street.
Yeah,
The houses there are mostly modern houses,
Yes.
south
Yes.
of the creek, until you get down to the corner
yeah,
of
it
the
was
mill.
known as
Mill
Park
Street.
Plaza.
Yes. just
But
wondered
I
if that
know
opened
that-
up the south part of Parsons Street to development, that bridge.
My guess is that that probably was the first substantial bridge. There may have been some sort of temporary wooden structure there prior to that wouldn't hold much weight. But I think this was the original.
Given the trucking that rolls over that bridge these days, it's marvelous, the weight that bridge has handled.
The one by the old laundry?
Yes, by the laundry, the building that's northeast of the bridge had been a laundry at one time, is what Carolyn's referring to. There was a hand in the back.
You mentioned that 3 months ago, one of his maps helped resolve a property dispute. Do you have other examples of ways that the maps have been useful in contemporary times?
Yes, there was an issue, there was an issue between village and town, Rhinebeck, involving an area near Hogg's Bridge. And the question as to, now the establishment of the village goes back to 1833, which is when the boundary was defined. But there was some question about where it in practice was understood to be, which would be important in a court proceeding as to who was responsible for the pollution of that creek. There had been a shellac factory there that had dumped stuff into that creek for many years. It's been long gone. I mean, it disappeared, I think, in the 1930s. But the residue is still palpable. I mean, you can take measurements there and you can get results that show oily substance there in the water, in the soil. So both the village and town, independently and trying to be anonymous, approached us here. I think actually the same day. One at around 10 a.m., another around 2 p.m., saying, would you by any chance have any maps of that boundary area, you know? And when somebody comes in and asks the same question, you're a little puzzled, and I guess I don't know if the village and town have yet resolved it, but we had some maps that showed that, how that boundary was understood, where it was understood to be. There is another map that I was gonna include here, I didn't, but folks in Red Hook may be interested. It's the line between Red Hook and Rhinebeck. This is it's a, what do you call it? I guess it shows the Armstrong property. Wint is probably familiar with this. The Armstrong property boundary versus the actual town line. And there are a lot of notes on this document that it looks to me like somebody was in the middle of some very important argument over just where that line was. Is it Rokeby somewhere close to that?
Well, the Red Hook boundary today is said to be, or theoretically, the southern boundary of Schuyler's Patent. And Beekman had acquired the southern portion of Schuyler's Patent in Red Hook, what became Red Hook, and of course had land on the Rhinebeck side of the line too, but the portion in Red Hook went to his granddaughter, Mrs. Armstrong, and I can't remember what happened to the southern thing. And that I don't remember a dispute down near the river, but there may well have been back in the area where Frank lived, which is very close to the town boundary there on Stone Church Road.
Yes. Yeah, what we have actually is not a definition of the boundary closer to the river. It is actually further east. Yes, Alan.
Just gotta say something, because you know, since we did all this work, I've always wondered, Frank Teal, what is this man, what is his makeup, what is his personality? You know, he carries a gun, goes out, he does his survey work and things like this. And I came to this meeting tonight specifically to find this information out about Frank Teal. And what you said, your dad said about it, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
Because I couldn't put anything on him of who he was,
Yeah.
of the like and dislike, or nothing.
Yeah.
He was just there as a figure that an interesting figure.
Yes.
And you finished.
Well, my father went to a graduate school of engineering, and I think that they, when Teal was hired to do some work at Rokeby, I think that they became very friendly and in a professional way. But Frank Teal was clearly somebody, especially toward the end of his life, who didn't mind appearing to others to be eccentric. I mean, the way he wore his clothes, he had puttees on because he was bicycling all the time. He didn't want to get his trousers legs mixed up with a chain. Well, that's perfectly understandable, but who else was wearing puttees as a matter of course, day in and day out, you know? In 1949, there weren't that many. And he always bicycled, and how he would get down to Southlands with a transit on the back of that bicycle, I don't know. My father said that's what he always did. He not only got himself to the place of business, but he brought all his tools with him. And my brother could remember his coming to Rokeby to lunch or something, and on the bicycle, I don't suppose he brought a transit with him, he was an old man, but so it's, you know, I think he was, I hope he was never a figure of fun to people, younger people, but he was certainly somebody that was enormously respected and deeply liked, and to honor him this way and And when we got the Elmendorf going in Red Hook, I was quite serious in saying the Great South Room there should be called the Teal Room, and we would put an enlargement of that photograph, the Tracy Dows photograph, which as far as I know was, well, you said there was a college period photograph of them too.
There's one, yes, that's reproduced by Claire Carr in the
Right.
article that she did
Oh, yeah.
for Egbert Benson newsletter.
But I really like the idea of calling that the Teal Room, then we could, the trim in the room could be painted teal. Robert Greenberg said, "You're not gonna mess with the colors. They will be whatever the scientific analysis says they are." But because he leaves no descendants, we are all his descendants, so to speak. And so keeping the story of his life and his character and his accomplishments alive, as you say, this is the beginning, Mike, and congratulations.
Thank you.
Just a footnote.
Yes.
We have on the wall of the farmhouse an elevation of the sawkill that was done by Frank at around the turn of the century, and it's a marvelous piece of art. And I've often wondered, and this fills in that blank, and I wondered why there was an elevation of the sawkill, but I suppose because it runs through the farm, it was there. And it's quite meticulous, and it's extreme, it's stark, it's beautiful in its rendering, and it's so precise. And that photo is a classic. I just love it. It just puts it all together. Thank you very much, Mike and Lynn, especially.
Any other questions? Okay. I think
Thanks,
we're
Mike.
adjourned.
Thank you.
Everybody